Chapter 12. The next 2 weeks passed slowly. Actually, they didn't so much pass as crawl along in the gutter. There was not the slightest sign of Chris, not the slightest clue as to where he might have gone. The others went out of hell 3 times searching for him. The first time just to my place, the second time to Kevin's and Homer's, and the third time a long bike ride at night to Chris's own house. They took a calculated risk and left a note there to say they'd been, because they thought that if he was anywhere, that was the most likely place. If he was anywhere, of course he was somewhere. Everybody's somewhere, aren't they? I finally sat down and read his notebooks, turning the pages awkwardly with my mangled fingers. I didn't like doing it, but I'd asked the others what they thought and they agreed it was okay, in the hope that might give us an idea of where he'd gone. I thought it was quite ominous that he hadn't taken his notebooks. They were so precious to him, but perhaps he had taken some. Perhaps he'd had more than 4. Chris's notebooks were so different to mine. His were more creative, all kinds of jottings and ideas and poems and stories and thoughts about life. Like this. We kill all the caterpillars, then complain there are no butterflies. Some of the pages I'd seen already, but none of the later ones. There were a lot of references to hell, but I couldn't always tell if that were our hell, the one we lived in, or the other one that we sometimes lived in too. Some of it was pretty depressing, but then I'd always known that Chris could get depressed easily. A bad black horse steals into my head and moves across the landscape of my mind while I sleep. He does what he likes in there. Next day I feel the damage. In the quiet mist, I watch her go. It feels like snow. There's a feeling that I get. I walk back home, sad and slow. But they weren't all depressing. The fall burst into life, a slither of wet limbs and startled eyes among the straw and the rich wet smell of birth. Then it was dawn. It was the light of life. This one I remembered from when he'd shown it to me in his first week with us. I'd liked it a lot. He often wrote things about horses, I guess because the Langs had quite a few on their place. Mares and foals stumble in the morning mist, running from the dark where their shadows remain. I live in the light, but carry my dark with me. This seemed to be the most recent one. I hadn't seen it before. They will carry me to the field through the reefs of mist, moist on my face, and the lamb will pause for a thoughtful stare. The soldiers they will come. They will lay me in the dark cold earth and push the clods in upon my face. Life's harder the deeper you feel things, was all I could think as I put the books away. Feelings, who needs them? Sometimes they're like a gift when you feel love or happiness. Sometimes they're a curse. Seemed like for Chris they were more curse than a blessing. I wondered again how Corey was getting on, and Kevin, poor Kevin. I could imagine him sitting inside the showground, looking through the wire and picturing us in hell, still with our freedom. He probably envied us, wished he was here, but we weren't so well off. I'd always been taught that freedom was everything, but it wasn't. Better to be in chains with the people you love than lonely and free. I was thinking, we should have an honour roll, a list of the people we'd lost, Corey and Kev, and now maybe Chris. Maybe there'd be more names on it soon. I suppose it was thinking about this that made me so wild with anger when I found Homer making a different type of list. He was standing by a big old gum tree, carefully carving vertical marks on it. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Keeping score," he said. "Keeping score? What of?" "The casualties we've notched up." I could hardly believe my ears. "Do you mean the people we've killed?" "Yes," he said, but the fury in my voice had alerted him, and he looked at me nervously as he said it. "You must be bloody joking. You are bloody joking, you absolute stupid bloody idiot. Do you think this is some kind of football match?" "Calm down, Ellie, it's no big deal. Homer, you don't even like sport, you never have, and here you are turning the worst thing of our lives into some bloody game." All right, calm down. I won't do it if it gets you that worked out." He was looking guilty as he started to realize that it hadn't been such a smart thing to do. I was so upset I couldn't trust myself to speak. I went storming off on my banged-up knee towards the track. Honestly, Homer could be so clever and such a leader, and then he'd go and do something like that. It was the story of his life, and even though he'd been great since the invasion, he was still capable of losing it completely, as he just proved. I was so upset about all the death and destruction we'd seen and taken part in that I couldn't imagine anyone else seeing it differently. I don't know. When someone intercepted me at the start of the track, I was too upset to notice who it was. He grabbed my arm and said, "Whoa, Ellie, calm it, calm it." It was Lee. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Oh, just bloody Homer being more annoying and juvenile than normal." He was still holding my arm, and I turned a little more so I was pressed into his chest. I had a bit of a snuffle in there, then asked the question Fee had asked me. "What's going to become of us, Lee?" "I don't know." "Don't say that, that's what everyone says. I want you to be different to everyone else." "Well, I am. I'm a murderer." I felt a tremble pass through his body as he said it. "No, you're not, Lee." "I wish I could believe you, but words don't change anything." "Do you think it was wrong?" He waited so long I thought my voice must have been too muffled in his chest for him to have heard. I started to repeat the question, but he cut me off. "No, but I'm scared at what there is in me that can make me like that. So many things happened that night, they mightn't ever happen again. Anyone would have gone a bit crazy after what you saw. But maybe when you've done it once, you do it more easily the next time." "I've done it too," I said. "Yes, I don't know why, but it seemed different when you did it. Chris told me how blown apart the guy was, and somehow using a knife is different to a gun." I didn't answer, and he continued after a while. "Do you think about it much?" I really cried then, sobbed like my lungs were coming out of my mouth. I couldn't stop for ages. The amazing thing was, Lee just kept holding on to me, like he could wait forever. Finally, I gulped out my daytime nightmare. I felt like there was this big shadow up in the sky hovering over me. It made everything dark and it followed me everywhere. When I'd calmed down a bit, we went further down the track. I held on tightly to Lee, even though it made it difficult to walk along the narrow path. We sat on a rock for a while. A tiny spider was on my arm, and I found the thin line of cobweb that connected him to me, so I could lower him to the ground. "Spider bungee jumping," said Lee, watching. I smiled. "Do you think what I did was wrong?" Lee asked, still watching the spider. "I don't know. Ask Robin, ask Homer, ask anyone. Just don't ask me." "But you always seem to know what's right and wrong," Lee said. "What? What?" I held him at arm's length and looked at him in disbelief. "You said what?" "Well, don't you?" "Lee, I have as much idea of what's right and wrong as that spider does." "Oh, are you sure? You always seem so confident." "Good God, do I?" "And Fee said a while back that I never looked scared. I thought you guys knew me pretty well. Seems like we might have to start again. The only thing I'm confident about is that I'm not confident about anything. I agonize about everything we do. Do you remember that time I slept with you and you never knew?" He laughed. One night I'd got back to the camp late and there'd been no one there but the two of us. Lee was asleep and I'd crept into his tent and slept there beside him. Well, that night, on the way back into hell, I stopped for a while on Taylor's Stitch and sat there looking at the sky and trying to figure a few things out. Yes, I remember. You told me. I only ever did figure one thing out, but it was pretty important to me. I realized that the only thing I had going for me was my lack of confidence, that it was sort of a gift. How do you mean? I mean that the more confident people are about their beliefs, the more likely they are to be wrong. It's the ones who are so certain, so black and white, the ones who never consider that they could be wrong or that anyone else could be right. They're the ones who scare me. When you're not confident, at least you keep checking what you do and asking yourself if you're on the right track. So you gave me a huge insult just now. He laughed. "Oh, sorry, but you were certain back at that camp that Homer was doing the wrong thing." "Oh dear, yes, but was he?" "Oh dear, yes, but he was. Oh, sometimes I wish life was all black and white." Racism would get even worse. Very funny. What was he doing anyway? Don't worry about it, he just regressed to childhood for a few minutes. Come on, let's go down to the flat rocks. The flat rocks were at a point where the creek emerged from the bush, its first glimpse of open air since its birth in a spring up near Taylor's Stitch. To get to the rocks, he had to leave the track and bush bash a bit from the first of Satan's steps to a little clearing in some scrub. Here the creek spread out and washed over a series of long flat stones that were often nice and warm from absorbing the sun's heat. It took a bit of effort to get in there, but it was worth it. I limped in on my sore knee till we found ourselves a nice rock and stretched out side by side, listening to the soft shushing of the water and the gurgling of a magpie. The two sounds echo each other, I thought. How are your hands? Lee asked, holding me by the wrist. Okay, they don't hurt as much. It's just a nuisance that they still need bandages. Lee moved a little closer and put his head next to mine so that we were cheek to cheek. His skin felt as warm and comfortable as a rock underneath me. I realized he was in a romantic mood. I wasn't sure if I was or not, but decided to go with the flow, just like the creek. So when he kissed me, I kissed him back, to his firm lips, and his tongue started to give me nice tingly feelings. I wanted to hold him more closely, but couldn't because of my bandaged fingers. It was a kind of crazy position to be in, and I grinned as I pictured how it would look to anyone watching, but I kept the grin to myself, not wanting to upset Lee. I realized Lee was pushing my t-shirt up, then trembled as his hand rippled across my stomach. These were fingers that were made for the violin, not for attacking and killing. He touched me so lightly, yet his fingers were firm, not soft or weak. By luck or experience, he'd found one of my most ticklish and sensitive spots. I loved being stroked across my tummy. He had my t-shirt up to my bra, which didn't worry me, but I wondered what he had in mind, how much further he hoped to get. He put his head down and blew raspberries on my skin above my belly button, then used the tip of his tongue to make little circles in the same spot. I hadn't been feeling turned on at all, but he obviously was, and he was working pretty hard to get me going. It didn't take long. I started feeling better, then best. Little ripples of nice feelings were spreading under my skin, quite deeply, and they met other ripples that were spreading from further down. It was all nice and warm and slow and lazy, lying there on the warm rocks, with Lee so hot beside me. He was on my side, leaning on one elbow now, using the other arm to touch me. With the flat of his hand, he again made circles on my tummy. Big, wide, slow ones. Oh, that feels good, I said, closing my eyes. The only uncomfortable feeling I had was that I needed to go to the bathroom. But I couldn't bear to get up, so I thought I'd wait a bit longer. Lee used the tips of his fingers and rolled his hand over and used his knuckles. I felt so tired and lazy that I hoped he would just keep doing that forever, and although I knew it was selfish, I hoped I wouldn't have to do anything in return. But when he undid the top button of my jeans, I figured I'd better not lie there for too long. I rolled over and embraced Lee with my elbows and forearms clumsily working his t-shirt up at the back, holding him as closely as I could. His knee was between my legs and I kissed him hard and long. I did have in mind that holding him like that might stop him from getting too far with my buttons, but he got his hands inside my waistband anyway, at the back, and his warm hands rubbed slowly across my warm skin. I sighed, long and slow, like a bee on tranquilizers. Lee wasn't saying anything, but the more pressure he put on the small of my back, the more I needed to go to the loo. Gradually I started pushing him off. Don't, he said, don't stop. Oh, I have to. I kept kissing him for several minutes, then peeled myself away. I was on my knees beside him, still holding my stupid bandaged fingers up in the air. I leant over and gave him a series of quick kisses right on his lips, but he turned his head to one side and said, "Where are you going?" He sounded quite cross. I laughed. "To the loo, if you really want to know." "Are you coming back?" "I don't know if I can trust myself, and I know I can't trust you." He gave a reluctant smile. I stood up and lingered for a moment, looking down at him. "I do like you," I said, "but I'm not sure. Living down here, things could get a bit out of control." out of my control anyway. I wasn't certain if he knew what I meant, but he would have to be satisfied with that, for the moment. I limped off into the bush to find somewhere to squat. At least by the time I got my jeans unbuttoned and down, with no one to help me, he'd have plenty of time to cool off.